you made some early acquisitions, didn't you?
Yes.
To build capability, I presume, build out that platform?
Well, remember the online brokerage world was sinking.
Yeah.
So when I first got to Ameritrade, there were about 200 firms that had online brokerage presences in this country and about 25 names everybody knew. But those firms were in a lot of trouble, and they didn't all go out and get somebody new to come in and take a fresh look at everything. So those assets, they were either going out of business or they became for sale reasonably cheaply. So as we started to control our own costs, we still weren't profitable yet, but we could see where we were going to become profitable. There were a lot of assets that were up for sale. Nobody started to buy those. So the first one we did was National Discount Brokers. Now at the time, our market cap was $700 million, and the street didn't necessarily believe we were going to survive, and National Discount Brokers potentially wasn't going to make it, and we bought them for $156 million. Nobody believed we were going to do that, and had we not been successful on that acquisition and the subsequent integration, we would have gone out of business. And 70%, and most of you know this, 70% of all acquisitions don't work. That one, if it didn't work for us, there wouldn't be an Ameritrade today. We started to get a little stronger, but the street still didn't quite believe in us. And the next big one, our biggest competitor at the time was Daytech Securities, which operated out of New Jersey. They were our size, and they did more business and were more profitable than we were. We figured out a way to get that deal done. At that time, our market cap was $1.2 billion. The deal was $1.25 billion.
Good.
Had we not gotten that deal integrated and successfully, we also would have gone out of business. And the street never believed we could do that. The street criticized us, said we paid too much for it, said we'd never be able to deliver on the numbers we said we were going to deliver on, but we delivered on all those numbers. And at some point, when the Wall Street started to see that we were actually delivering on all the things we had said in the fall of 2001, they really started to give us credit for that and started to believe us and started kind of jump on the bandwagon.
How much of your time was spent selling those deals? You had to go out and sell those deals, didn't you?
Well,
to the street.
You had to sell. We had to sell our story, and I think part of the story is credibility in management. That's why our delivering what we said we were going to do became so important over time. They wanted to make sure your strategy made sense. They wanted to make sure your strategy was sound. And I felt we did a reasonable job of that, and everybody would look and watch and listen, but they weren't buying our stock. But then as they started to say, hey, these people are actually pulling it together, and they not only did NDB, they pulled off this Daytech thing, which was miraculous, they started to become believers.
How much of your time do you spend now and spent during your tenure working with leaders, developing, nurturing? I'm thinking of the way you develop a player on a team. I mean, a CEO in my world is in the talent business. You have to spend a certain amount of time focusing on talent. What was your take on talent, and how did you spend your time with people?
First of all, I agree with you, Roger, about kind of what a CEO has to do. I think any leader, doesn't have to be the CEO, has to do that. I think you need some private time to think. You really do. And if the only time you're doing that is in the car or maybe at night when you're going to bed or Saturday morning, that's not enough. You need to have some time to be able to think, otherwise you start to fall behind. But your actual time, if you have to talk to somebody, you're doing that. You have to talk to the media, you have to talk to shareholders, you have to talk to the board, you do that. But other than that time spent doing those types of things, I think you spend all your time with your people. We talk about there are 3 priorities we have, and I think this is true for any business. You don't exist as a firm without clients. So you better do a great job of taking care of your client base. As a business, you're expected to provide a fair return for your shareholders. You've got to be able to do that. If you don't do that, you're not in business. You don't take care of your clients, you don't have a business. You don't take care of your shareholders and have a profitable return, you're not going to have a business. But the only way you deliver to either one of those 2 constituents is through your employees or through your associates. So you've got to spend time with your people. They've got to understand. Remember in the beginning, too, they didn't know if we were going to make it, and all of a sudden we start to buy these other properties. You've got to be able to stay in front of your people. You've got to be able to communicate with them. I've often said also at Ameritrade, TD Ameritrade today, I've often said our company is not being run by me. It's being run by the top leadership in our organization. And I think that's probably for us the top couple of hundred people or so. So you spend a lot of time with your people in terms of, I try to give them immediate feedback. It's nice to have the annual one-on-ones and the 360s, and I'm not knocking that. That's all important. But I'd like to believe if I were sitting down with somebody at the end of the year, they're never going to be surprised at what I'm going to tell them because you give that feedback all along. So frankly, you're always thinking about your people. You're always thinking about your talent. And as you set up your own, determine your own strategy, you've got to have a variety of skill sets to execute on that strategy. So you're spending any time you possibly can that you don't have to be doing something else, you got to be spending thinking about or working with or talking to or thinking about your people.
In that, you've made the transition from CEO to chairman. How, looking at your firm, how did you plan for that succession? Was that part of this whole talent conversation? I mean, was it over months, years? How did you do that?
Every job I've ever had, I've always thought in terms, I thought my job was to always leave that team or that institution or that division, that organization, better than what it was when I left it. And that means part of my legacy for that particular institution is how well that team or firm does well after I'm gone. I mean, it's still a team that I was part of. It's still a team that I helped lead. So I always felt it was part of my job to make sure that there would be the right person there to succeed me. So that'd be always something that I thought about and always something that I worked on. I probably started to think about that very, very hard my second or third year at Ameritrade. And I would have conversations with the board about, at some point, it's going to be time for me to move on, or at some point, I might get hit by the bus or get sick. We've got to be prepared for that. So I think for us, what happened was, so we were having regular conversations with our board about that.
Speaking of boards, where I spend a lot of my time thinking, you're seeing a lot of shifts going on in board practice today. How much time did you spend, I want to be careful using this verb, managing your board? That was a critical part of your job as CEO. How did you do it, and what did you do well, and what did you learn from that? Because we have a lot of people here who have to manage relationships with boards.
Yeah, I've got a great successor in our CEO, Fred Tomczak, and I think that was something that I needed to spend a lot more time on than, let's say, Fred does.
Right.
And for those of you that are aware of our history, our firm was founded by Joe Ricketts in 1975. So he ran the firm, and it was his firm, and he went public in the mid-1990s. And because he owned so much of the stock, even though it was a publicly traded company, the Ricketts family owned 56% of the stock. So we had 8 board members. In effect, he had 5 votes. So as CEO, even though I was the one responsible for running the company, I reported into the board. If the board didn't feel I was doing a good enough job, they could get rid of me. And there was one person that basically had 60-something% of those votes to be able to get that done if he chose to. As we started to become bigger, and as we started to develop more of a global reputation, as we started to become more of a publicly traded company, that changed. And we became far more of a corporate board rather than a family-held board. And there were differences of opinion that would exist between, let's say, one part of the board and another part of the board. And this is the way, let's say, the family had run the company for a long time. This is the way it's kind of being run now. So what I've always found what I found to be effective when there might be disagreement on the board was to just have a lot of good one-on-one conversations. Here's why we're doing what we're doing, and solicit good feedback. And I think one of the mistakes a leader can make is allowing his or her ego to get in the way. You can't ever let that happen. So if I were going down a particular path, frankly, that the board gave me good feedback on, it was the wrong path, we wouldn't go down that path. But if there's one that I believed in, and the board felt pretty good about it, but we weren't necessarily unanimous in it, we'd have individual conversations, but then we would have presentations at the board, and the board would vote, and we would unite and move forward from there.